It is my great pleasure to welcome Christopher Smith to the IMLR to talk about the Hrc and future developments with special reference to modern languages and cultures. Christopher is, of course, very well known to everyone, but I will say a few words of introduction. He is Professor of Ancient History at St Andrews University. His research explores constitutionalism and state formation, with particular emphasis on the development of Rome as a political and social community, and how this was represented in ancient historical writing and subsequent political thought. He has written extremely extensively on this topic. The development of his research has been accompanied by the fulfillment of a number of prominent roles. While at St Andrews, he was Dean of Arts and of Graduate Studies, before becoming Proctor and Vice Principal. He then began a period of secondment from 2009 to 2017 as Director of the British School at Rome. And it was in this role that many of us had the opportunity of working closely with Christopher and greatly appreciated the commitment, the support, and the meticulous attention to detail that he showed in every aspect of his work for the BSR and the very wide community that it represents. Following on from his time at the BSR, he held a major Leverhulme Research Fellowship, the title of which was The Roman Kings, a Study in Power. From September 2020, Christopher has been in post as Executive Chair of the Ahrc. I don't think we need any reminding of the importance of the Ahrc in our lives, so it is intensely reassuring to know that we have Christopher in this role and at this time. So I'm going to pass the word to Christopher, who's going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then the rest of the hour we have for Q&A. The event is recorded, and if people wish to pose their question in person, that will be part of the recording. And after Christopher has spoken, we will be unmuting the proceedings. Of course, people can also post their questions in the chat. So, without more ado, I shall pass the word to Christopher.
Charles, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me clearly enough. Good. It's a huge pleasure to be with you all at IMLR, and an absolute joy to see so many people here. It's the work of IMLR and School of Advanced Studies is so important to the functioning and the visibility of what we do in Arts and Humanities. So it's a real pleasure to be here. What I'm going to do is rattle through a few bits and pieces, but try to leave as much time for you to ask questions as possible, and to give us a chance to follow that. I am going to share a screen, but it's not death by PowerPoint. There are just a few slides which I've got, I hope, and I need to just find it. There we go. And I hope that you can see that. Very good. Excellent. Let me just. So what I wanted to start with was a word of thanks to everybody for the One World Research Initiative, which has been a particularly valuable part of the Ahrc and the modern languages agenda over the past while. The One World Research Initiative was, I think, an extraordinary opportunity for us to concentrate on the role of modern languages in communities, and to see how it could make a real difference to the way that modern languages could be positioned. I'm just going to pick out a couple of achievements which I've found particularly exciting. I was really thrilled to see the way that the focus on community, on the way that research sheds light on how support for community and indigenous languages can improve social cohesion and foster conflict resolution. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. I'm just going to see, that might be a slightly better version for you. So that was absolutely brilliant. Diversity. The way that the collaborations with partners demonstrated the vital connection between language and cultural diversity in an increasingly global society was, I think, a really important positioning of modern languages as something which is one of the critical bridges that we have across our society. And the really key developments that you collectively were able to make in the field of education, teaching resources, workshops, innovative ambassador schemes, which reinvigorated curricula and addressed how we can think about student numbers in modern languages was really valuable. And in parenthesis there, I'm grateful to those people who have been quick at correcting some of the not particularly helpful statistics that sometimes get run out in the press about modern languages numbers, and showing that they're actually much stronger than is sometimes reported. On behalf of the AHRC, we'd like to thank the hard work and commitment of the Ahrc PIs and co-Is, their research teams, project partners, the community groups you engage with, the Modern Languages Advisory Groups, and of course, Professor Janice Carruthers, who led all this, and Charles himself, who did a great deal, making a valuable and impactful contribution for the promotion and advancement of languages. What are we going to do next with Ahrc? We're really excited about the follow-up, and AHRC is committed to evaluation and to trying to kind of move forward in the way that we think about the major research projects that we have. So there'll be a further set of activities to inform our approach to languages research, including some horizon scanning work and relevant stakeholder engagement, as well as building communication activities which are based on the Ahrc legacy publication due in July. So I'm really keen that in a real and hybrid way, we take this project out into all parts of the United Kingdom. I'm very keen that we should be taking this report into the devolved administrations, into places that have a really exciting modern languages agenda, and thinking about the next stages, gathering those ideas. So that's Ahrc. What about the AHRC? So I want to talk a little bit in the next section about the AHRC vision. We were asked to produce a vision for the last spending review, and the last spending review was a funny beast because it never really quite got off the ground. We were promised or half expected, half led to believe, half, if you can have three halves, hopeful, of a very substantial uplift in funding. But although some aspects of that were delivered, and UKRI got a 3-year settlement for part of its activities, there are a whole bunch of reasons, which we needn't go into, why we didn't get as far on as we might have done. So we sort of walked halfway up a hill and walked halfway down again, which is why this vision never really surfaced beyond the internal activities of UKRI. But now we are in spending review territory again, and you're getting a bit of a first shot at this. This is going to be finally approved in its current form at our upcoming AHRC board meeting as a document that will give us a kind of direction of travel for the next 2 or 3 years. It's not prescriptive, and it's not meant to include everything we do, but it might give us the chance to actually start a conversation about strategic direction. I think that's really important, because this should be a co-creation, but we have to start somewhere. So please regard this not as something that is polished and unbreakable, but something that is the beginning of a conversation. I'm really keen to start, I sometimes call this the AHRC donut. I'm very keen to start at the top left with discovery research, discovering ourselves. It's absolutely critical that AHRC commits itself to supporting the ideas that our communities have. The AHRC should not be a top-down body telling people what to do. Discovery research is absolutely critical. Any of the ideas that we have are built on the foundations of the research that you bring forward. And I want that to be true for every part of what we do. So we will continue to look at the schemes that we have. We are thinking about ways in which these can be flexed to meet current circumstances. We know that the top end, the largest grant, is probably not quite large enough. We're also very much aware that there are issues for postdoctoral awards. We're keen to make sure that there's still spread of awards, so we can't lift the barrier, the sort of minimum level too high, otherwise we reduce success rates. So there are a few changes that we may do, trying to get the balance or maintain the balance, but in essence, discovery research will remain at the absolute center of our activity. Now, because when we think about discovery research and we think about arts and humanities, that means everything that any human has ever thought about, sung, painted, stuck on a wall, written down, built. Even today's science is tomorrow's history. It means that there's an incredibly wide range of material, and it's therefore absolutely natural that we find ourselves addressing contemporary challenges. I don't think this needs to be forced. I think what we do need to do sometimes is to give a push in particular directions. We also need to capture how we address contemporary challenges. I'll come back to a few of our ideas a little bit later. But I want to be clear, this isn't a process of forcing us to respond to agenda. Rather, it's a matter of saying that there are no agenda which we do not contribute to. I have a particular interest myself, but I think the AHRC is really a critically important player in the mobilisation of our cultural assets. The AHRC is the research council which works most closely with all of the independent research organisations in the museum, gallery, library and archive sector, and that includes science museums. So we have a commitment and we have a responsibility, but there's also a real opportunity. We know that we can work incredibly successfully with this sector. We know that our research feeds into their activity and that they are themselves generators of extraordinarily important research. Using the cultural assets that we have in the United Kingdom to illustrate contemporary challenges and to work on discovery research, to feed discovery research, is absolutely natural. And that's why we've worked so hard recently to support digital enhancement in museums, research infrastructure. The first research infrastructure grants that we've been able to give have been to the GLAM sector, IROs, for digital spectroscopy, scanning, sorting out X-ray machines that were about to explode, all sorts of things like that. Really exciting stuff that actually is moving their research forward, but also making sure that we have the kind of basic discovery research that is allied to their activities. And I think when we put all this together, we want to demonstrate how exciting it is in the most creative way possible and to reach as many people as possible. So we have a strong commitment to the creative economy, and that includes creative industries. And the more people that we can reach with the research that we're doing, the more questions are thrown up, the more people co-create questions, and then we can't find ourselves back in discovery research. Just to give an example, the Research in Film Awards that we host, just one example amongst many. All of this needs to be shot through with some values. Equality, diversity and inclusion is absolutely key for UKRI, and it certainly is for the Arts and Humanities Research Council. We must remain an international research council. And the word that isn't in there, because I ran out of space and capacity in my donut, is skills. The Arts and Humanities Research Council spends a greater proportion of its budget on postgraduate research fellowships than any other research council in the UK or I. We commit somewhere around about 35% of our baseline budget goes into this area. We are committed to continuing to support postgraduate research. We have to make sure that we're getting real value for money for that commitment because it is so large. So that gives you a sense of what we're trying to do. And I guess that I see this very much less as something which directs the community to think in these ways, very much more as ways in which we can gather up the amazing things that our communities are doing, colleagues, researchers, partner organizations, etc., gather those up and present them in a really simple and communicable way, so that when we go into conversations around spending reviews and around the value of arts and humanities, we can use this to say, look, we do amazing research that just naturally feeds into every argument that we're having in contemporary society, that deploys the extraordinary cultural assets that this country has across all of its institutions, both major and local, and then presents them in an incredibly powerful and exciting way, which has real economic benefits. So in order to try and take all this forward, we need to have some initiatives. Let me just explain why we need to do some things at our end in order to persuade government and others to give us more money. We need showcases, we need windows, shop windows in which we can kind of bring forward the work that we do. Ahrc was one such example. And I think that the success of Ahrc means that it's right for us to keep on trying to move forward in this way. So I'm going to give you an example of some of the things that we're going to be doing over this financial year, 21-22, many of which are intended to try to unlock some of the resources that will be available through Spending Review 22-23 and onwards. One of the things that we've been doing for some time now is looking at the contribution of arts and humanities into artificial intelligence. And we think that there are real opportunities for us to talk about a responsible and trustworthy next generation AI. Environmental humanities has been really important for Hrc. We're leading in COP26 along with Hrc. We are keen to harness the possibilities of design to talk about net zero, and that means everything from buildings to cities to sustainable fashion, a whole range of different areas that we can touch upon. We've spoken about cultural assets. We have for some time been working on the way that cultural assets can support health and well-being in the broadest possible sense. We've been successful at attracting a lot of interest from the Medical Research Council and other agencies for this work. We've got a couple more years only of our first phase of the Creative Industries Clusters programme. We need to move into a second phase of Creative Industries Clusters to carry on that good work. It's going to be a key part of what we do in the next spending review. And that feeds into the place agenda, which has the potential of quite a lot of government money attached to it. But for us, I think is really exciting in terms of how we think about locality, how we think about what universities do in their locality, how we think about different kinds of locality, be they real or be they virtual. I'm keen that we start thinking about some big themes for the future and a couple of ones which we're going to scope out and just explore. And I'm going to come back to this with in specifically to the modern language community and civic discourse. A lot of the work that was done in connecting communities, which was in a sense the predecessor to Ahrc, is still valid and relevant. And I said that, mentioned that we were very grateful to Ahrc for all the work they did around communities. It seems to me that bringing these things together and thinking about civic discourse could be a really valuable way for us to carry forward our research activities. And intergenerational justice is a very interesting umbrella under which we bring quite a lot of the things that we've already talked about: net zero, sustainable development, the role of arts and humanities in thinking through the quite challenging philosophical conversations about, where our responsibilities lie to the future and also to the past. And this is, of course, a challenging conversation, but one I don't think we should duck. Many of the other things that you're seeing there are smaller initiatives. So we're appointing an EDI coordinator who's going to really look across the whole piece of AHRC's activity, bring together what we're doing well, and also to challenge us to do better. We have a number of engagements of public engagement and policy, including fellowships with FCDO and DCMS, which I think are going to be really important ways of joining and linking university communities into those departments, but also making them understand some of our research drivers. In DCMS, it's going to be particularly important because our relationship with DCMS is strengthening all the time. I think they are a very important partner for us. We're keen to celebrate the BBC centenary next 2022. We want to follow up some of the work that has been done very successfully through GCRF and ODA with our own funding streams, which are less subject to volatility. So that's why you see a programme of about £2 million of investment into the 2021 UN International Year of the Creative Economy for Sustainable Development Goals. We are working very hard on our international partnerships. And then there are a couple of areas: building skills, data and digital skills. We're doing a survey of where we're strong and where we could be stronger, which is going to feed in very much into some of our digital infrastructure hopes. And we will be doing an engagement exercise about postgraduate research, precisely to get to kind of value of our investment there. So that gives you a sense of what's on the AHRC plate over the next while. All of these are being scoped in various ways. There are sandpits and lead fellows and so on and so forth. And they're all intended to get us going into a very positive conversation before, during, and after the spending review that is coming up. Now, I want to talk a little bit, and I'm actually, I'll leave that up there for a while, and then we can stop sharing. But I don't have another slide. Broader landscape of humanities and science. I just want to make a few comments here. It's very easy, I think, for us to see ourselves as beleaguered and embattled. But I want to try and make some counter arguments without undermining the fact that some people are in really challenging circumstances in their universities, in terms of precarity, in terms of the pressure on particular departments and so forth. But there are some good news stories, I think, or at least some positive aspects that we need to focus on, because if we can build on them, then we strengthen our position. First of all, I think that for all its faults, and it has some, UKRI is a good place in which for AHRC to be. I've found an extraordinarily positive and welcoming attitude from other research council executive chairs. There's a real desire to collaborate across the UKRI landscape, and that includes with Innovate UK. We've got fantastic opportunities, and we bring an enormous amount to the table. Every single subject has got something to do, and you'll see that much of what's laid out here is actually synergistic. And the discovery and research, which I stressed is absolutely core to what we do, that doesn't go away. That discovery research is often feeding in to some of these synergies. The fact that it's feeding in tells us something, though, as does the fact that there was an enormously positive response, for instance, to the COVID rapid response call. There was a hugely exciting response to some of our work around EDI. There have been some really exciting demands to get involved further with some of these cross-cutting themes. Humanities are changing, and that's for the good. Every generation reinvents the way that we think about humanities and what it wants to do. And I think we do have quite a politically engaged group of researchers who want to see their work make a difference. And we need to bear that in mind, but it also means that the targets where they want to make a difference are going to move over time. We need to make the changes, this transformation of arts humanities, really count and work to our advantage. So we're doing work that tries to capture some of the ways in which arts humanities underpin broad economic advantage for the country. So just recently, beginning of this week, we published a report that we commissioned on narrative skills in business, where we asked FTSE 100 executive chairs, CEOs, and chairs of boards what they thought about the importance of narrative. Unsurprisingly, they all came back and said it was marvellous and really important, and it needs to be embedded across our educational system, something with which I think we can all agree. That's a good hook on which all sorts of things can hang. Where does modern languages fit into this? Now, my answer to this is everywhere. I can't see anything really very much on here where there isn't a modern languages point of view. And I think about that in various ways. It's in terms of the essential internationalism of modern languages community. It's in terms of the deep attention to language and language structures. It's about the bringing to bear comparative understanding. It's about the way that modern languages digs deep into communities, sometimes unexpected communities within our own country and abroad. Pretty much everything that you do can speak to some aspect of this, and there are other ideas that you will be having, which we will draw out of the Ahrc research, and which you might want to share with us. And that's something that I want to close on this issue of that broad landscape of humanities and science. I want the AHRC's door to seem to you to be open. If you've got ideas, let us know. You'll be the ones who come up with the best ideas, not me. We did a What's Next call, which opened up the opportunity to say what would be the most interesting things for arts humanities to focus on over the next while. We've got at least 4 of those projects up and running already. I expect us to go around again, and it would be wonderful to see how the Ahrc work generates new what's next questions that emerges from the modern languages community. But I think that it's probable that we're all going to have to work in a highly collaborative and synergistic way. And I think that one of the things that we do need to discuss and debate is whether we need to have a little bit more space to do the big projects that cut across disciplines and bring together bigger teams. And that's a question I'd be interested in your views on. I'm going to close. What would it look like to think that we are winning the argument for support for arts and humanities research? Well, I think one thing that we would say is that we would want a strong association with Europe, and we have it. It was a difficult argument, but UKRI, the National Academies, the whole community was very, very strong in arguing that association with Horizon Europe was essential. Horizon Europe has been a bigger funder of arts humanities research in the UK than the Arts Humanities Research Council. We've got to get back into that competition. We did incredibly well in the last set of advanced research grants. We did better than any other country in Europe. Horizon Europe is really important for us, and we've got to make that count, because there will be a conversation about whether in a few years' time we want to associate again, and we want to be able to make a really, really strong argument for the value of that. Another way of saying that we're winning the argument would be to say that there is strong support for the basic research ecosystem. Now, in some ways, we're also winning this argument, although it might not feel like it. roughly 70% of the funding that goes for arts and humanities into universities comes through QR. Only 30% comes to the Arts and Humanities Research Council. We're a massive outlier in UKRI in this regard. We're far the smallest receiver and distributor of money in comparison with QR than any other research council. I'd like to shift that a little bit, but I think fundamentally it's right. Much of what we do rests on this very rich and powerful ecosystem that is delivered in universities. I think we need to ask hard questions about how QR is distributed, how we see it. That's a job for universities to discuss. And I do think that we'll want to just ask a question about whether there's a little bit of headroom that should come back in the direction of Hrc for some of the strategic initiatives at scale that I've started to mark out here. But the government has insisted that the proportion of QR rises. So that means that more money will be coming through the QR system into universities. Now, I know that there are some issues around this because of concentration, but nevertheless, let's see what the ref brings. My guess is that what it will show is that arts and humanities is extraordinarily strong across the piece, and that therefore there will be some ways in which that rich ecosystem will be supported. We've got to keep making that argument. And lastly, I think as modern languages has rethought, reimagined, and reconceptualized the way that it can be embedded in curricula, the way that it can be presented, the way that stories can be told about the value of modern languages through the Ahrc report, amongst other things, and the huge amount of work this community has done, we are beginning, I hope, to get a little bit in front of change rather than be following it. And this is going to be important. I've said that the arts and humanities are transforming. I think they are. I think that we're going to go through some uncomfortable times. But I think that we can still make incredibly strong arguments for where arts and humanities contributes to the economy, to education, to society. You're making many of those arguments. And I hope that we can get into a positive cycle of actually leading that transformation and showing how the changes are adding value. That's not easy, and it needs a lot of thought leadership, and it needs a lot of biting of the tongue, and sometimes it needs a little bit of righteous annoyance at occasions when arguments are handled poorly. But I think we're in a good position to do that, and what the Arts and Humanities Research Council wants to be is your partner in that conversation about how to transform arts and humanities to remain at the very centre of our social, economic and educational agenda. And I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much for that, Christopher. That's an exciting, dynamic, highly inclusive, powerful vision of the role of modern languages, specifically in a much greater societal movement. We have about 25 minutes for questions, so please do post a question or indeed raise your hand, and I will, of course, come to you. So, I mean, I thought perhaps I might get the ball rolling to begin with, simply by asking a question talking about the global reach, the international nature of the Ahrc. And indeed thinking about the way in which many projects were, indeed from modern languages, were involved in global challenges research funding. Could you say a little bit about the future of that stream?
Yes. The first thing I'm going to say is it's a little uncertain. That's probably something of an understatement. This is going to be an enormously difficult conversation in this spending review. And I think that I want to try to decouple for a moment internationalism and official development assistance. I think that there is going to be, we saw with yesterday with the issues over the amendment that was not taken forward, that the official development assistance argument is not going to go away. It's really important, however, that what we do is develop stable and non-volatile funding mechanisms for international partnerships. And I think that this has become a really key and core agenda for ourselves in UKRI and also for our government department, BEIS. Now, what the mechanisms are, I think, is going to be discussed at considerable length, but my sense is that there will be a real desire for us to be a global research player. We've got to build trust. We've got to build trust with our own universities. And since I'm also UKRI's international champion, I'm well aware that there's quite a hill that we've got to climb again there. A lot of councils are looking at the way that they embed the global challenge agenda within their own activities. And I think for us, in the short term, this is probably the most important thing for us to do and the most exciting thing for us to do. So we want to think very hard about equitable partnerships. We want to make sure that that agenda, which sat at the heart of GCRF, is not lost sight of. We want to look at multilateralism. We want to look very hard at how the existing partnerships we have can be extended out to include other partners, particularly if ODA funding is rather short of supply for a while. That's one of the reasons why we're looking at this idea of using the UN year for creative economy for sustainable development as a way of generating ideas from you, bringing back some of that agenda. It's not the same level of commitment as we had before, and it'll take time to rebuild that, but it's a start. And what I would say is I think every research council in UKRI is absolutely committed to trying everything they can to bridge this period whilst we're having the discussion about what international funding looks like in the future. So, in short, the funding mechanism may change, but I think our commitment doesn't. And the fact that, extraordinarily, thanks to the huge commitment of universities, pretty much every one of the GCRF grants is in some shape or form continuing, is a testimony to how much this matters for all of our communities. So I think that's something that we need to build on. I hope that's a helpful start.
Thank you very much for that, Christopher. I see Anya Lewis has a question.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Chris. That was an amazing talk, very inspiring. And it's a lot of the things you said is music to my ears. We are based in I'm reader in cultural studies at the University of Sheffield Hallam, and we are based in the business school. So the idea that business is all about narratives and storytelling and performance, I've been saying for 10 years. And the only caution and the fear I have right now is that I'm in the minority of looking for interdisciplinary collaborations, simply because there's so much anxiety in the sector at the moment that people will, in short, it'll be survival of the fittest is what I'm worried about, that the colleagues that are in a stronger position will not want to collaborate with other disciplines simply because everybody's worried about jobs at the moment, to put it at the simplest. So that's just food for thought for you. I do have a question about the Ahrc funding. I did a bit of number crunching for that the other day, and I looked at the entire funding from 2006 to 2027, so roughly 20 years. Ahrc is 5% of the total of UKRI funding. Out of those 5%, 6% goes to modern universities. As somebody who passionately believes in the value of modern universities, in the value of interdisciplinary, and in the value of national and international collaborations, what would your advice? How can we change that dynamic? Does that make sense? That question, Chris?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. It rings true. So number one, on that percentage point, we mustn't lose sight of the QR aspect of this. It's really critical because let's think about it. What would we actually prefer? Would we prefer for us to have 70% and only 30% through QR, as for instance EPSRC does? I think that would lead to even greater concentration and probably be negative in its impact. So we must always remember that QR is critically important for all universities. It does get spread, it just doesn't get spread evenly. That said, your question is a very pertinent one. I think that I think that some of the most exciting transformations in arts and humanities are happening in universities that are having to flex their curricula for all sorts of reasons, and where interdisciplinarity is perhaps happening sometimes because it's necessary, because
exactly, for pragmatism, absolutely.
But that pragmatism is producing some amazing results. So look at where our creative industries clusters actually are.
Yeah, and the theory-practice divide is taken away. Certainly, as Sheffield Hallam is a really good example of that.
So one of the reasons why looking at that circle that I put up is so important is that you can see that even if, and it's not necessarily the case, but even if discovery research happens to twist in a particular way, there are lots of opportunities elsewhere, and we are really thinking hard about how our strategic initiatives can spread our activities across. And because we've thought very strategically about these 4 sectors, we want to be certain that we have parity of esteem across all 4. So that we're really thinking hard about the creative economy, we're really thinking hard about cultural assets and contemporary challenges. And my guess is that when we think about things like, for instance, mobilizing cultural assets for health inequalities, we might very well find that that's being done brilliantly somewhere else. Last point, bring us your ideas. Some of the most exciting things are happening in Sheffield Hallam, in places like that. Knock on our door and say, why don't you get some funding coming into an area like this?
Okay.
And we'd really welcome that.
Thank you. I'll be in touch. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Anya.
Thank you. I'm just looking across, see if there are any hands raised. To get through a number of pages to do so. So
there's a question about the next phase of connections with creative industries, which I can answer if that would be helpful.
Absolutely, Christopher.
So the principle of the clusters program, I think, is absolutely hugely successful. We've seen greater leverage of external funding into those creative industries clusters than we even anticipated when we set them up. Some of them have more than doubled our investment. So that's really great. We know that there are some areas that we didn't get to in the first instance of creative industries clusters. A couple of them I think are really quite interesting around modern languages, actually. One is publishing. I'm really struck by how successful independent publishers have become, and often in translation. And there's an enormously exciting issue there about how we think about what publishing industry can become. Secondly, music. Now, we did nothing for the music industry at all in the first phase of creative industries, not by design, it's just the way it fell out. That's a huge area for us to think about. And I think that there are a whole bunch of really interesting issues also about creative industries and education. I get a little worked up about this. I find it irritating, infuriating that we do so poorly as a country in both literacy and numeracy. Our attainments are way below where they should be for us to be as creative and as productive in the economy, but it also mean that people simply aren't able to flourish as they should do as human beings. We know that things like poor literacy has it's quite intersectional. And B, we know that if you look across, for instance, the prison population, there are huge rates of literacy and innumeracy there, and I don't think these are unconnected. Yet we've got this fantastic opportunity for creative industries to think of new ways of teaching, and there are all sorts of anecdotal issues about what has actually worked better for some children in lockdown, because being able to do things at slower pace, etc., etc. There's a huge bunch of things. I'm not the expert on this. I don't know enough about it, but I'd like to find out more. I think there's some really interesting issues there about how creative industries and the teaching of modern languages can work together, which I know was something that I think that Ahrc began to think about a little bit. So that's so what we'll do. Clusters phase 2. We'll also look at some of the demonstrated models for Audience of the Future. We'll continue to have a policy and evidence centre, I hope. And lastly, we are hoping very much to create a virtual production infrastructure to be the first major infrastructure funded by UKRI on behalf of Ahrc.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Paul, and for your response, Christopher. I noticed that Jonathan Payne has a hand raised.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Christopher. Perhaps as the co-chair, along with Chris, of the Narrative in Business project, I could just add a sentence or two on that. This is a genuinely new bridge, I think, that the Ahrc has managed to establish with the business community. And I think reaching out to almost a third of the FTSE and getting the kind of feedback that we have about the relative importance of narrative as a skill in business is both an important message to the arts and humanities community, and also an important link that establishes starts to build hopefully a better relationship, a broader relationship between the Ahrc and business, which I think is also important from the point of view of getting this important community on our side in the funding debate. I've put on the chat links a couple of the links to the report, which and there's a short summary there, which is only a dozen pages, which people might want to look at, and if possible, send around. So that's it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you for all your help in getting this going. It's a project that owes enormous amount to you and to Andrew Thompson, my predecessor, and to the researchers who did the work. Yes.
Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. There's a question from Giuliana Pieri, which, unless, Giuliana, you want to unmute yourself, I'm happy to read.
No, you can read it, it's fine.
Okay. You mentioned the contribution of the arts and humanities to the economy, which is a crucial point. How do we counteract the negative narratives around our subject areas as elite and not very relevant to careers? And at the same time, the resistance that some staff have towards anything that sounds too applied.
Okay, so I think let's take the first bit first, data. I think there are some challenging bits of data, and I think we do have to face up to this. We've got a problem because destinations and beginning salaries don't look great for arts and humanities taken as a whole, for some subjects in particular. There are good reasons for some of that, but I think we need to work quite hard at how we actually manage that challenge, how we manage the data that could be set up on the other side. But I think it's going to be there, and it's not bluntly, it's not going to go away. So we need to accept that that's going to be a challenge. I think, therefore, it's probably going to be incumbent on universities that want to sustain their arts humanities to think quite hard about how they actually gather better data. because a lot of our problem is that very few people respond to some of those questionnaires and surveys because they've gone off and done exciting things and they're having a great time, not recognizing that the absence of data is really unhelpful to us. So there's a whole bunch of stuff about data there. I think there are some other bits and pieces, just, a couple of things. I think it's very important that we engage with those universities that are thinking about transitioning out of some arts humanities subjects and press very hard that the narrative is not about the fact that they're not heading away or they're not rejecting degrees that aren't jobs facing. That was a very depressing comment made by one university a while ago. I don't think there's any. I think that universities will adapt their missions and they will choose their subjects. What I'd really like to do is to engage with them to make sure that when they do so, they don't criticise explicitly or implicitly arts and humanities, because that's not helpful. In terms of where we do add value, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff to be done, again, about data, about what kinds of jobs arts humanities people, graduates do. So I had a look at some data which was allegedly about STEM occupations. And actually there was a huge amount in what were STEM occupations that were in fact actually straightforward administration and management, were being held by arts and humanities graduates. And there was also quite an interesting chunk of stuff about lighting engineers, which I figured actually included, because of the messiness of the data, the kinds of people who go around and fix the lights for theatres and musical performances and Glastonbury Festival and all the rest of it, which are often coming out of creative industries sorts of degrees. There's a KPMG report, interestingly enough, which shows the cost of degrees, and is kind of doing that in a really rigorous way, which counteracts some of the other conversations about cost. But cost to benefit is going to be a challenge, and it's going to be about data. The resistance that staff have towards anything that sounds too applied, I think, I don't think it's for the Ahrc to insist that every person thinks the same way about the way that they do research. And that's why I've tried, why we have tried to create a vision that is circular and that includes discovery research at the very, very top of our agenda, but simply allows pathways through for people within the university sector and also people outside the university sector, all that rich research ecosystem in the GLAM sector and beyond, to find pathways in and to find funding. I never, ever want us to be in the situation where we say, look, if there isn't a widget that is produced as a result of your work on John Locke, you're not going to get any money. That's crazy. That's not us. It's not any research council. None of us behave like that. But what we have to do, I think, is use those areas where we are successful in creating application to justify the whole of the circle. And that's why I stress with contemporary challenges, it's not that we force this, it's that it's natural. Who else is going to talk about modern slavery but the Arts and Humanities Research Council? Who else is going to talk about environmental humanities but a representative of the subjects that actually invented the concept of nature in the first place? Who else is going to talk about well-being and flourishing except the Research Council that holds every part of thinking about our spiritual and mental well-being, and also its connection with the physical body, and that thinking for 3,000 years, and practice probably for very, very much longer, as evidenced by archaeology. So this is just natural to us, and I guess that's what I would say. Let's use our successes. Now I've got a question about the UKRI budget showed HRC is receiving a boost to the core budget for 2021. Yes, numbers. If you look at the 110 million what you will see is that there's a chunk of stuff in there that is actually paying for things that we were required to do, like COVID rapid response. If you take that out, you come to 100.2 million, which means that we've gone into 9 figures, which we actually have done before, but not for a while. 100.2 million represents an advance on effectively 98 million of 2.2 million. Within that, we have to bear in mind that we are doing quite a lot of, all research councils are doing this, we're doing quite a lot of patching up around the corners. There's quite a lot of repair work because of things that have happened over the last little while that we've had to do. So there is no doubt that there has been an increase in the UKRI budget. There is also no doubt that all UKRI councils have not got as much money to spend on the research that would have been done through the ODA budget than they would have had before. So I'm responding to, Sam, your question, not by denying the point. It is true that there is good news and there will continue to be some good news, but we have to be quite realistic about what it actually means for ourselves and other research councils. And I want to make this point really, really strongly. There are swings on which the Hrc has done badly and roundabouts on which we've done quite well. And there are similar experiences in other research councils. I have found a hugely attentive attempt to balance out the joy and the pain amongst us across UKRI. But the settlement is quite tight, and the settlements will continue to be tight because of a whole bunch of reasons, which I could spend hours going into, but in essence, there's not a lot of cash around. So what does this mean? It means we have to be really strategic about our thinking, and I hope you've seen us trying to do that. It means we've got to be really good at setting up some strategic initiatives like the ones that I've described, which raise our visibility, but also allow us to tap into the next iteration of what are sometimes called the hypothecated funds, the central funds, which are actually what funded Creative Industries Clusters Programme towards the National Collection and other projects. And it's why we've got to husband our resources carefully. So that's why we really need to look at postgraduate research, not because we want to reduce it, but because we must absolutely make sure we're getting real value for money and it's synergistic with the other things we're doing.
Thank you. I see that Sam has said absolutely a very comprehensive and honest explanation. Thank you. And thank you for your question, Sam. I know that Christopher has to go to another meeting very shortly after this. So unless anyone has a burning question that they need to ask, I think we will draw things to a close here. One of the things that's very clear from what you say is the need to think transformatively about the humanities, and that we all have to be involved in that transformation. And that, I think, is very key to all that you were saying, and the process in which the AHRC involves everyone in the way it thinks about societal and intellectual and creative development. I'd like to thank Christopher for what was an inspiring talk, and indeed for the generosity, the clarity, the precision and the dynamism of the answers that he's given us. So thank you very much for that, Christopher. And I hope that we'll be able to organise a session of like this in the relatively near future, and indeed continue with a relationship that we do have with the AHRC. And as I said, we are extremely relieved and pleased that you are in this post. Thank you very much, Christopher.
Let me return the thanks and say that I really welcome this opportunity and look forward to another chance to talk with you. And as I say, our door is open. Dismiss me a conversation which, as much as possible, we can have openly, candidly, honestly, and together. And then we'll make the best of our forward progress, and we'll have all these wonderful ideas which we all so much enjoy hearing about and telling everybody about. So thank you all, and best wishes. I also just wanted to say one other thank you, which is more or less everybody in this call will have had an incredibly difficult year and a half, in which teaching and research and looking after postgraduates and being a teacher and being a postgraduate will have been immensely difficult. I fully appreciate that. The fact that our sector has actually, I think, done incredibly well is down to your commitment and passion for your subjects, for your students, for your research. So thank you on behalf of everybody in the AHRC for everything that you do. We'll stay in touch and see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.